Welcome to part 8 of the Fog Napoleonic intro to how to play the game. In this episode, we'll cover the combat phase. So for combat procedure, there's 6 key tables that you need to move you through the combat procedure. The first one being to calculate the basic combat dice available. To those basic dice, you then have additions and losses, after which you would apply effective cohesion losses. Then you need to calculate the to-hit score, with the basic to-hit score being a 4, and then you add POAs or points of advantage to that, as well as applying the Elan rerolls. So depending on whether you're superior or not, or whether you're poor, or whether you've got a commander attached to the unit, can help the reroll situation. And then once you've calculated your POAs, you can see that the fourth table tells you the to-hit score, depending on whether you have no POAs or negative POAs or positive POAs. And then you need to calculate the effective hits. You can see from this table the difference between normal line troops and guard, and how much harder it is to break guard. Guard pretty resilient, needing 6 hits to drop them 2 levels, whereas line troops only need 3. And to break guard, you need to give them 8 or more hits. So pretty tough troops guard. And then the last table is to determine the outcome of the combat. And this is where we'll run through how troops are affected, whether they're broken, wavering, disordered, and how pursuits happen. So let's move through these in a bit of detail. So the first one, the combat dice allowance. You can see from that yellow arrow, there are 2 lines to this table, or 2 key lines. The first line is for infantry or cavalry in tactical or extended line, and excluding irregular lights. So in the example shown, A is a large unit in tactical, so it gets 8 dice, as per that top of the table, and B is a small unit, so it gets 6 dice. In the second example, C is a small unit in extended line, so it still gets 6 dice, even though it's an extended line, whereas D is a unit of irregular lights, so only gets 4 dice. They count as other troops or situations, being irregular lights, which is the second part of the table that we come to. So one of the examples under all other troops or situations is when squares are fighting cavalry. So in the case of C here, C is a small infantry unit in square, so it gets 4 dice, whereas D is a cavalry unit fighting infantry in square, and so also gets 4 dice. Of course, if D was a large unit, they would get 6 dice. And then the final example is combat inside terrain. I always say terrain is a great leveler because it reduces how many dice everybody has. So if you've got poor troops, it's worth trying to get them to fight better troops inside terrain. So as you can see in this example, both A and B are inside the terrain, so their dice are reduced. A being large, it is a large unit in tactical, it gets 4 dice, and B being a small unit gets 4 dice. So then dice additions and losses. So let's look at flank and rear support. So in this example, A is an infantry unit in combat versus 1, another infantry unit. Now B is potentially in rear support area for A, or it is in rear support area for A, but because they're cavalry, they don't give support, and that's because cavalry don't give infantry rear or flank support, and vice versa. In the second example, C. So C here doesn't give A rear support, and that's because even though it's behind C, the front line of C is, or should I say, A is not even partially forward of a line extending C's front edge, as you can see from that dotted line. Whereas D, fortunately for A, is giving flank support, and that's because A is within D's support zone, and D is within 2 MU of A. Then finally here we can see E doesn't give A flank support. So even though E is within, although 1 is within E's support zone, E is more than 2 MU from A. So basically E is too far away from their friendly unit to give support. And then finally 2 is providing 1 rear support in this example because 2 has 2 bases directly to the rear of 1, and 2 is also within 6 MU of 1 and can reach 1's rear in 1 move. So quite a few different iterations of where you can get flank and rear support, so worth playing that through. Then uphill can also be a tricky situation. So here you can see that A counts as uphill of B, and so it gets 2 extra dice. And this is because it has at least 2 corners of the contacted base. The base over here has at least 2 corners on the hill, and the contacted base is closer to the ridge crest than B's contacted base. And therefore all of A's contacted bases are uphill of all of B's contacted bases. So the key point here is it's the contacted bases, not the entire unit. In the second example, neither A nor B count as uphill, as both sides have a base touching the ridge crest. And so the uphill is negated. What you can see from this, it's really worthwhile when you're setting up the terrain for the battle to clearly define with your opponent where the ridge crests are, as they can be important. Right, let's calculate the hit score and the effective hits. So the basic score for anyone to hit in combat is 4. And points of advantage, or POAs, add or subtract from this. So here we have infantry facing non-shock cavalry. They get no POAs, and so they'll hit on 4s, whereas cavalry fighting infantry in square get a minus POA, and so need 5s to hit. In the second example, we have cavalry fighting artillery, so they get a plus POA against artillery, so need 3s to hit. And the artillery, always in combat, will get a minus POA, so need 5s. And then finally, you'd go and work out the effect of the combat hits. And here we can see the effect of different troop types. So the difference between line troops and guard, and how much harder it is to hit guard. You can see from this table quite clearly. But basically, 1 hit drops you by nothing, 2 to 3 drops you by 1 level, 4 to 5 drops you by 2 levels if you're line, 6 to 7 drops you by 3, and so on. So what you can see from this, if you're line troops, if they steady, 6 hits would drop them to routed, because they're dropping 3 levels. So disordered to wavering to routed. Right, now we've done the combats, what happens? So combat resolution table, this one on the top right here. It's quite a tricky stage of the rules, so it's worth reading this through and giving it a bit of practice before you get too stuck into the game. So on this chart we can see A to D belong to the active player, so the player whose turn it is to move, and 1 to 4 belong to the non-active player. So what's happened in the combats? So a lot of action. So A is broken, 1 is wavering, a few others are disordered, and there are a couple of steady units. So how do we play this through? So the key of this table is you start from the top and you move your way down in sequence. So therefore, doing that, the first thing you do is retire broken units, non-active player first. So there's only 1 broken unit on the table, so that's A, and they must now make a retire move. The second thing is we retire wavering units, and here we can see 1 is wavering, and although A has retired, broken, 1 is still in contact with B, and so now 1 must retire. The third part of the table is we retire disordered units, non-active player first. And in this case, the non-active player, remember, is units 1 to 4. So A and 1 are gone. So now 2 is still in contact with B, so must retire. And 3 is in contact with C, so must also retire. So now we have A, 1, 2, and 3 have all retired. So that leaves B and C on the table, but even though they're disordered, they're not in contact with anybody, and so obviously don't need to retire. And in fact, B, if you look down at the pursuit section of this table, B will be able to pursue because 1 retired and is wavering, whereas C won't be able to pursue 3 because although 3 has retired, the table will tell you here disordered units do not pursue disordered opponents. So C can't pursue 3, but B can pursue 1, which in effect means they're getting the benefit of their opponent's wavering. Whereas here, D and 4 are both steady, so in this case, neither of them retire, and the combat will continue in the next combat phase. You don't see this happen too often, but occasionally you do. So that's it for the combats. Hope that was all clear. In the next episode, we'll cover the outcome moves.